Alright guys, welcome back to the garage, or welcome to the garage. It's Friday the 16th of December 2022. We did end up getting a bit of snow overnight and heavy wet snow. So quick look out the window here, and the plow has been by. So we were shoveling early this morning to be able to get out of the driveway to head to work. But anyway, back on the 1981 Alfa Romeo Spider project. And we talked on the last video about doing the door glass height adjustment. So we're just about to start that, and I figure I would start by showing you what the current situation is like on this car. There's also another thing that Doc wanted me to look at, and if you can see here, there's a little bit of daylight you can probably see through there, just on this seal here at the top. It seals really well elsewhere, even on the passenger side. It doesn't have that little gap in the weather stripping, so I'm going to see if I can do something to mitigate that. So over here it looks pretty good. No light can be seen through there. So we'll see if I can fill up that little gap in some way, shape, or form. Might be able to do something with this quarter light window. Maybe be able to move it up a little bit. We'll see. I said I might be able to also just work on the gasketing a little bit and add a little bit more gasket over on the other side. Anyway, we'll try to fix that little area to make it a little bit better and a little bit more watertight. So like I said, I'll show you the current status with the windows. Let me get in there, power up the car, and we'll roll the windows up, and you can see where we're at as far as where the limits are on the windows currently. They are much too high, and they're actually interfering with the closing of the door or the closing of the window against the convertible top. So let's see where we're at currently on both the driver's and the passenger side. All right, we got power. You can probably hear the fuel pumps humming. Anyway, let's put the passenger side window up. And Doc is also concerned about the window speed on this side. I'm not sure if it's something binding on the inside or whether it's just the actual 40-year-old Alfa motors. But anyway, it still operates as it should on the switch. Anyway, that's full up on this side, or sorry, on the passenger side. Let's go up on the driver's side, and that actually works much more quickly than the passenger side. All right, both windows are fully up. So let's have a look. Let me turn the car off and we'll have a look from the outside. All right, as you can see, the window is fairly far up above the actual quarter light here. And as we close this, it's going to interfere with the top here on the sides. It's not going to fit up under the pocket the way it should unless you manually tuck it up under there, which is not something we want to do. We want it to tuck up under there nicely by itself. So that needs to come down for sure on the driver's side. Let's have a look at the passenger side. All right, same situation is occurring here on the passenger side, but to a lesser degree. You can see it's just above the material there, so we need to get that again to tuck down within the pocket when the window goes up. So this one is quite a bit lower than the driver's side, but still above the quarter light here. So we'll make an adjustment here to get this fitting under the pocket a little bit better as well. So as I'd mentioned in the previous video, that's going to entail me getting into the innards of the door. So that means the door panels have to come off, the door pulls have to come off, the cranks have to come off, etc. So we'll go ahead and we'll start doing that process, and I'll take you some video along the way so you know how to do that to get to your door internals if you need to do it on your Alfa Romeo Spider. Alright, I'd like to be able to set you up on a tripod here, but it's pretty tight as far as the quarters are concerned, so I'm just going to have to narrate you through this. So the first thing I want to do is take off these little trim pieces here. There's a little trim piece here and this little black trim piece here that we basically need to put a thin prying tool below and sort of pop out. There's like a little channel that these fit in, so just be careful when you do that, and we'll pop these out, and then we'll go after the next step, which will be to go after these screws here on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the bottom of the panel, and then these screws at the top of the panel. You're also going to find screws in behind here, but we'll talk a little bit more about that once we pop these panels off. So usually I start from the top and just get a little small prying tool. I'm just using a little thin bladed screwdriver to get into the top, and then of course I've got a plastic prying tool. All we're going to do is just pry this out of the little channel that it sits in, and then like I said, we'll go after this other door crank. Okay, we've got the little panel off the door catch, door release mechanism, whatever you want to call it, door latch, and just behind here you can see they have two small tabs, top and bottom. So there's a little tab there that fits in these little areas here, so you need to basically pry that out there. Now if we take a look back at the armrest, there's a screw up. I don't know if you can see that in there. Screw up in there, probably my flashlight's in the way, but there's a screw up deep in there, and then there's a screw down deep in this pocket as well, so we need to remove those eventually. But let's go after these bottom door screws first and the two top door screws, and we'll come back to the armrest. Alright, I know I've mentioned it in a previous video, but I thought I'd reiterate for those who may have not seen this. So there's a plug here in this door panel. So directly behind this plug is the mechanism for the window wind up. So the Alfa Romeo engineers thought about the possibility of the windows not operating with the power motors. Maybe they figured they'd have a short life, I don't know. But anyway, in the stock Alfa Romeo toolkit, they provided you a manual crank. So what you would do is pop this plastic plug out, insert the manual crank to be able to move the window up and down without the assistance of the electric motors. Forward thinking. Okay, we have all the panel screws out, so we're now going to go after the screws holding the armrest and the one screw holding on the crank for the door opener. So we'll go ahead and remove those three screws now. Now there is one more screw, and it's going to be behind this trim piece here. So this trim piece has to be pried out. I believe there's one or two more screws, but we'll pry this out as well. Let me do that first before we remove these screws. It'll probably be a little bit easier to remove this little trim strip first. Again, thin bladed screwdriver to remove this and peel this out of the channel, and that'll reveal the screw, at least one screw back here. Alright, so I was right. There's one screw back here. You can see the, I think you can just see the opening there. So screw here, two screws here, and then again that one screw on the crank. So we'll go ahead and remove these, and we'll come back. Alright, the armrest and the release has been removed along with the little escutcheon there. So we're back to a panel now with all the screws removed. The door pocket can stay on. The door should now be loose, or the panel should now be loose. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this top piece first. Just lift it up a little bit gently, pull it out of its little recess on the top here, and then that will release the bottom panel. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that now, carefully. Alright, the door panel is successfully off, and the top panel, trim panel, is successfully off. It is just held on with some clips here along this top rail, and I believe these clips also hold on the fuzzy seal. So here's one clip still left on the trim panel at the top, so that's what that looks like. Anyway, we are now going to, basically I wanted to make one statement before we go further. So I guess if you're just adjusting the door glass height, you could leave this top trim panel on, but I was thinking of trying to get to these two bolts here that adjust the quarter light forward and aft to basically take up that gap up there in the weather stripping. So we'll play a little bit around with moving the quarter light to see if I can make that a little better up the top of the windscreen. Okay, so we're into no man's land for me. This is a new learning curve. I have done some research on the issue and how to get the windows to stop a little bit lower. Now it is a mechanical stop on these windows, and you can probably see these, it's obviously cable driven as well, which is a little different and a little scary. So you see these two locations here. There's a bolt here that holds a wire, and there's a bolt here that holds a wire. On the inside of this glass are the stops, and like I said, they're mechanical stops. So it's a little bracket with a rubber stop on the top of them. Now it's pretty hard to see obviously through that glass. It's pretty dirty down the bottom here. So we're just about to attempt to actually remove those stops. Now again, I'm a little bit, not a little bit scared, but these are actually right through the glass. So we're going to be very careful here. I don't know what to expect when I actually remove these stops. I know that they need to be adjusted at the same height, otherwise you'll have a stop, you know, the glass may go up crooked or stop crooked at the top. So we're going to try to keep them fairly equal. Now what I think I'm going to do first is probably just get the Sharpie out, and we'll do a mark on the cable where we're at currently, just in case we need to go back. Now what I can see with first look, now you're not going to be able to see this again because the glass, oh maybe you can, let me see if I can get it behind here. Yeah, you probably can't see it, but there's a bracket in there, and it's like it's kind of like an L bracket, let's say. So on top of the L bracket is a rubber pad, and as it goes up it contacts something within the door here and stops the glass physically from going any higher. Now it looks to me, and just feeling underneath the glass, it looks like that shelf that should be like this, it looks like it's tipped over like that, so it's not doing anything. This one here, it doesn't seem like it's got any buffer on top, so I think it's actually lost its rubber buffer. So I guess what we'll do is we'll, like I said, we'll mark these, and then we'll attempt to remove these stops on the back of this bolt. Again, a little tight in there from my hands, but I can pretty much feel this one, and it does not have a bump stop on it at the top. This one does. So this one is missing something for sure. I don't think just obviously putting a bump stop on the top of this one's not going to help, because this one's actually in the wrong position. So maybe I'll just rotate this up and get it in the right position and see where the glass stops with this one rotated as it should be. Again, if the glass is too high or too low, we may have to change the position of this, but at least we can probably rotate that bracket so it's in the right orientation as a start. Okay, there's the bracket removed from that area there. And again, I believe this should have a little bump stop on the top, a little rubber piece that is missing. But let's take this one out over here and see what that one looks like. So it's 10mm wrench. You have to get your hand up in behind the glass to get another secondary wrench on there. It's a little tight for my hands, but I was able to get this one off. Hopefully we'll be able to do the same over there. Anyway, let's get this one off and we'll compare it. But like I said, I'm pretty sure we're missing a rubber buffer or a bump for the top of this piece here, so we're going to have to probably figure out what we want to do there. If we are missing this piece, I'm thinking something like the felt pads for the bottom of furniture probably do, something like that. Probably glue a piece of that on. I know they're self-adhesive usually anyway, but we could probably add a little extra glue. But let's see what it's actually supposed to look like. Alright, the secondary piece is now off, and here it is. And as suspected, it does have a rubber buffer on the top of it. So that was part of the problem, this one not having the buffer. But the major problem was, so this is installed in the glass like this, basically, and it was sitting over like this. So that was not going to work. Like I said, I believe it's a mechanical stop inside the door here somewhere, and this would go up and hit that and stop the glass from rising. And there is the adjustment in this slot, basically up or down. So I know there are two different styles of these just based on some research that I did. There is an earlier style, I believe, that actually got a sort of a jackable, let's say. So it's like a screw type where you can actually move this up and down on a screw, but this is obviously a fixed point. So like I said, what we'll do is we'll try to find something to use as a buffer on this one before we go any further. And then we'll play around with the height adjustment to see if we've got enough height in the slot to get the window to stop where we want to once we get a buffer put on this one. Okay, sometimes you got to get a little creative. So I don't have any felt pads for my furniture just kicking around. So I've got this buffing wheel, this cotton buffing wheel from one of my Dremels. So if I do a size comparison, it's pretty close as far as, let me see if I can show this to you. As far as the thickness is concerned, again, I do have the ability to move this up to compensate for thickness, and it's relatively the same size diameter. It's a little bit smaller, but I think that's going to work actually. So I think what I'll attempt to do is to glue this to the top of the other bracket where it's missing this buffer, and we'll go from there. Oh, and I know some of you are going to ask the question, did you look down in the door pocket to see if you could feel that? And it is nowhere to be found in here. I've done a pretty thorough search of that cavity, so it's fallen off or disintegrated, but it's definitely not down in here anywhere that I can see. So that's why we're going to a replacement. All right, I've just made an executive decision. So I am going to make a trip to the hardware store. The rubber washers on the back of these plates are torn and in pretty bad shape. So I do not have any rubber washers to replace these with, and it's kind of important since this directly backs onto the glass. So I want to make sure that when we put this back together that I have a good rubber insulator against the glass. So I decided that we're going to make a trip to the hardware store, and while we're there we'll pick up some of the felt pads as opposed to trying to make something with this this wheel. If I had some rubber washers kicking around, I think that would have worked out, but since we're going to the hardware store anyway, we'll look for some felt furniture pads. Alright guys, it's Saturday morning and we had a successful run to the hardware store last night and picked up a couple of things that I thought might help us. First of all, we got the rubber washers, which were going to be kind of important to reassemble this mechanism or bracket against the glass. So we've got a bunch of rubber washers standing by. So then I was looking for something to replicate this little rubber buffer on the top here, and I thought about furniture felt pads. So what we bought are these pads here that actually have a screw base to them, and I've done a little slight modification. We've turned them down a little bit on the edge here. You can see the diameter is smaller. I've turned it right down to the sides of the felt, and I've cut down the screw a little bit, and we can actually use that. I'll put it together so you can see how I've arranged to assemble this to the bracket. It's essentially, I'm not going to be able to do this one-handed. We'll put you on the tripod and come back. Alright, so here's the idea now. We've turned these pads down. So here's the bracket that we need to replace the rubber buffer on. So I am going to re-glue the felt here, by the way. I've got some glue standing by, and we're just going to double glue this to make sure this stays on top. So there's the bracket, there's the pad, how that will go. Now it did actually come with a small plastic nut, but I'm going to put a washer on the bottom here to start with, and you can just see me drop that on here now. And then we've got our plastic nut standing by. Here's the plastic nut, and we'll just put that on off camera. We'll put a little bit of Loctite on this plastic nut to keep it in place. So essentially that's what the new stop will look like compared to the old stop. So there are the two in comparison. So like I said, we'll glue this down a little bit, but those will be the new stops. Alright, going to clamp this one, let the glue set up, and then we'll move on to putting them on the car. And just a quick shot of how I'm clamping these, just with some binder clamps and some glue, just to make sure that felt doesn't come off. So here's another option to consider. These are called gripping pads, and they're used for something like washing machines to keep them in place on a concrete floor. They are rubber material. Approximate thickness is correct. They're a little bit too wide, so I'm going to trim these down with scissors. They are adhesive backed already, so let's trim these down and we'll have a look at utilizing these possibly. So we've cleaned the back of the bracket with a little bit of sandpaper, actually a flap disc on an angle grinder, just to scuff it up and make sure it's completely clean. We've cleaned that with rubbing alcohol as per the suggestions from the 3M people to stick this pad on now that we've trimmed. So the other option, again, it's adhesive back, so just pull off the adhesive backing. And we'll stick this in place. And there you go. There's another option for your little bump stop. A little less elegant maybe, but probably this is like a permanent fix atop the top here. It's quite a strong adhesive that's not coming off. So maybe something like that is the way you want to go. That's, like I said, pretty simple, but I'm sure it'll be effective. Again, rubber material, which might be better in this application versus the felt. So I think we'll go with this version, although I'm pretty sure that both ideas would work in this instance. Again, if you want me to just do a comparison of the two. So there they are. And as far as thickness is concerned, pretty close as far as the thickness is concerned. So again, we can just adjust this bracket up a little bit if need be to compensate for that 1/16 of an inch or whatever it might be. But anyway, let's get these back on the car. Alright, we've got the new buffer installed and we've got the brackets oriented in the correct position. So we're going to go ahead and try the window and see where we end up as far as where it stops at the top. The brackets right now are all the way at the bottom. We've just got them on there sort of snugged up, not really tight. And we'll give it a shot. I'm sure it's probably going to take a couple tries to get us to the right stop point of the windows. So it's going to be a bit of trial and error. But let's try it once here and see where we get to with the window fully up. Alright, here we are on the first attempt. Haven't tried to close the door yet, but let's give this a shot and see where we're at. Pretty good. Definitely good on the front. I'm going to try to see if we can do something on the back here and see if we can get the rear window to go up a little bit further. It is sealing properly, but it actually does match the curvature here, so maybe that's not too bad after all. But we'll see if I can do a little bit of adjustment on that rear and see if we can bring it up just a tiny little bit more. But it's perfect here at the front. Doesn't interfere or overlap with the top, so that's looking really good at first adjustment. And let me see if I can play around with the rear a little bit, although I think that's pretty good the way it is. Alright, second adjustment, and it did bring it up a little bit more. Actually, I think we're pretty good now. Don't really want to play with it too much, so I think we're going to probably leave it there again. We're perfect at the front, so I will play a little bit with this quarter light before we button things up, see if I can move this a tiny little bit. If you look at the angle of this quarter light, it is a slightly smaller or slightly larger gap at the top here than it is at the bottom. So I'm hoping I can maybe just move this quarter light over like a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch to take up a little bit of this gap to get rid of that little bit of light through there in the weather stripping. So see what I can do as far as the quarter light is concerned, but I think we'll button up the window height project on this side and let's play around with the quarter light a little bit. So we'll tighten up those stops fully and call this job on this side done as far as the window height is concerned. Alright, for that quarter light window adjustment, there are 13mm screws. So we just got to ratchet out and loosen those off. I think they're captive nuts. Been trying to get my hand up in behind there to feel if there's a nut on the back side, and I don't believe I can get access up there on the back side, so I believe they're captive. Anyway, they're loose, so let's see if I can do a little tiny adjustment on that quarter light to bring it a little closer to the A-post and take up that little gap. Alright, we did manage to move that quarter light a little tiny bit. I'm not sure if you can see from the gap here. It's a little tighter to the A-post, and it's better. I can still see a tiny little bit of light through there, but not bad. We got to remember this is a 40-year-old plus convertible, and I don't believe they're ever watertight, probably from the factory. That's definitely better. I think I can just mitigate that area by adding a small piece of weather stripping up there and be good with that, because there's no other adjustment I can make to the top or to the window to be able to compensate for that. So it's not bad, but we're happy with the window adjustment for sure. So we'll go ahead and we'll stick this door panel back on and give these windows a good cleaning. Alright, before I put that door panel back on, we'll do a little bit more lubrication of the roller system in the car and make sure everything's as free as we can get it. This window operates much better than the passenger side does, so there really isn't any issues over here with either the motor or the rollers. Like I said, I think the motor might be just a little weaker on the passenger side. But anyway, we'll go ahead now and we'll put the door panels on after we do some lubrication. Alright guys, fresh off the success of doing the driver's side, we're now going to move on to the passenger side. And you can see how we kind of have a different problem here. We have the rear overlapping, whereas the front doesn't. So we're going to try to lower the rear of the glass in this instance. And I think the front of the glass is in pretty good shape. I can open this door. So there's where we're at on the front of the glass. We can probably go a little bit lower And like I said, we'll try to lower the rear edge of this glass. So let's see what's going on the inside of the door in this instance. All right, not sure if you're gonna be able to see this. Here's the passenger side door, and you can probably see that bracket not sitting upright. It's kind of tilted about a 45-degree angle forward. So that's probably not doing anything as far as the front of the window is concerned. It might be catching it a little bit, but obviously not in the right position. The rear one I can see looks like it's standing straight up, but it's hard to tell whether it's got a buffer on there or not. So we're gonna check that. So let's take those off and we'll come back. All right, here's the bracket from the passenger side front, so towards the front of the car. And as you can see, as mentioned, I thought it was hitting the corner of the stop because it was kind of sitting on an angle like 45. So it looks like it was stopping it just barely. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna rotate this cap a little bit, and we'll probably continue to use it. You can see how the rubber washers on the back perish. So we'll replace those for sure before we put this in the correct orientation. So that's what the front looks like. Now we'll go after the back. One more thing, make sure you have a pickup magnet, some sort of magnet, because you're definitely gonna drop things like lock nuts and washers down into this cavern down here, and without a pickup tool it's kind of fussy, with big hands at least, to be able to pick up things from underneath this bracket at the bottom. So magnetic pickup tool, I think in this job, might be a must unless you are very sure-handed. All right, the rear on the passenger side also has its buffer in place, so we're just going to adjust this bracket, and then we'll do a trial and see where the glass ends up at the top. All right guys, here we are in first adjustment, and it's dropped down a little tiny bit at the front here, dropped down a fair amount at the rear, so let's give this a shot and see how we've done. So good seal there, all the way along, good seal there, it doesn't overlap. I may want to go up a little bit, tiny bit higher on the front here, but the rear is good. So I think we'll just adjust that front bracket a little bit to bring that window up a little bit higher. So, and then we'll call this done. So we'll do one more adjustment, we'll come back and take a look, and then be done with this side. So if I want the window to travel higher, I'm going to be pushing the bracket down. If I want it to travel lower, I'm going to be pushing it up. That's where the stop makes contact. So we're going to be pushing this down slightly and then checking the window again and see if we got enough. If not, we'll keep adjusting until we do. So down for this adjustment, which is going to bring the window up. All right guys, we managed to bring that up a tiny bit more, and I think we're going to call it good. It's shutting pretty well now, so everything looks good. No interference with the top. Nice seal, so I think we're going to call this side done. So let's put the door panel back on and wrap this project up. Again, there is no issue with the weather seal over in this corner, so we don't need to play around with the quarter light on this side. It was just the window, and we've got that resolved, so we'll call this project done after we get everything wrapped up and put back together. All right guys, the window project is all wrapped up. So I'm happy with the outcome. It no longer overlaps the top, either at the front or the rear. Fits quite nicely actually on both sides, so happy about that. We still need to do a little bit of work on that little tiny bit of light we can see through the corner here. And again, that's probably just going to be a little weather stripping work on my behalf. But other than that, I like to fit the window on this side as well. So again, looking good. So no more overlapping issues for Doc to deal with. So another job crossed off the list. Move on to something else.